All right, welcome back to Making the Argument. We got a special interview for you today. Earlier this year, I think it was March, I went out to a live action summit in Southern California, and I was there to speak a little bit about masculinity and the proper role of men to be husbands and fathers, and our job about protecting and providing and all of those traditional things which are so out of favor with the culture these days. And I got to tell you, one of the most interesting parts of that entire event was not getting to meet a whole bunch of people that I really thought were awesome and people that I had seen before and thought, oh my gosh, I've seen this person on Instagram or YouTube or whatever else. It was sitting there, and I remember I was kind of in the back and I was working on something else. I was kind of preparing to get up and speak, and I was listening to Dr. Jennifer Morse just crush it on stage as she was explaining her position on various things with respect to the traditional family, as she was talking about the life issue, as she was talking about sexuality. I was listening to her talk about it, and the arguments that she was giving were just impeccable. They were incredible. And look, let's be honest. There's a lot of people that I happen to agree with ideologically who I don't always think make the best arguments or the most culturally relevant arguments or the most intellectually consistent arguments. And so when I hear someone making one that I'm like, my gosh, this is flawless. Why didn't I think of it this way before? That was just really, really impressive. So Dr. Morse, thank you so much for being on Making the Argument today.
Oh, well, Nick, thanks for having me on. I was impressed with your talk as well. And that event was stupendous. It was a young leaders conference. And boy, I was inspired by those kids. There's about 750 kids in there, and they were cheering, at all the right places. They were cheering, both. I think you had that experience, and I sure did, that they would, just burst out, just bust out excited and everything. And at least my video from that event has been posted. Yep. And so you can hear the kids lose it, in a couple of places during the talk. So it's really great. It was a great event.
It really was. It was a lot of fun. Well, listen, I just want to introduce the audience to you here a little bit.
Okay.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to list through like some of the accomplishments because you've taught economics, which that was another thing that I found fascinating, was that so many of the people that were there to speak had maybe studied psychology or early childhood development, or they had opined on various issues with respect to the family. And you've done all of that as well, but you're also you're a trained economist. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of your academic career and the path that you took that has led you today to have written several books on a wide array of issues, from economics, the family, the sexual revolution? Can you just give us kind of a brief overview of all of that?
Sure. Yeah. So my PhD's in economics. That's the kind of doctor I am. I'm not a medical doctor. I can't do anything useful like deliver babies or set bones or anything like that. My doctor's in economics. I taught economics at Yale for 5 years, and then I taught at George Mason University in Virginia. I taught there for 11 years. And I got involved in conservatism, broadly speaking, through free market economics. Because when I first learned about free market economics, it was back when the Soviet Union was still a thing and Marxism was still a thing, and free market economics just made so much sense, and which Marxism made no sense, and the Cold War was still on and so on. And I was kind of enlisted in the business of defending the idea of a free market as opposed to socialism and communism and even certain kinds of government overreach and regulation and stuff like that. So I fit into the econ department at Mason, and and that was my life. That's what I was doing. And somewhere in my early 30s, it became clear I was going to get tenure at Mason. And I said to my husband, "It's time we started a family." And he said, "Okay, fine." We start trying to have a family, and lo and behold, the baby did not come during the month that I had set aside for it to come. Because, see, I had it all planned that I was going to have the baby and go back to work, and a complete ridiculous plan. So we had, long story short, we had 4 years of infertility, which is important because it brought me back to the practice of the Catholic faith. I was a cradle Catholic who left the faith. Pretty much I left the faith over sexual issues because I thought, they're so uptight. I want to do what I want. I don't have to listen to them. I'm going to do what I want. And then, in the meantime, then proceeded to make a mess of my life, which, even my kid sister could figure out that I was screwing up, a kind of a thing. But it was infertility that really got the grip on me. And because I was, used to um, having things go the way I wanted, as long as I played by the rules, the rules that the modern world has set for the modern woman, which is that you work hard and you get your education, and by all means, you don't have a baby too soon because that will ruin everything. And so I was doing that script, right? And lo and behold, the baby didn't come on schedule. And it was a spiritual crisis along with everything else. And for those of you in your audience who have experienced infertility, whether you're, on the male side of it or the female side of it, it's a miserable experience. It's a miserable experience. But it brought me back to the practice of the faith because I could see that I couldn't control everything, which is a good thing to know before you have kids. It's good to know you can't control everything, right?
Because they're definitely going to teach you that.
Right. If you're not ready for that, man, you're gonna be a mess. But so anyway, in 1991, we adopted a little boy from a Romanian orphanage. And if you remember, 1991, the Berlin Wall went down in 1989. So we were kind of in the first batch of people to get these orphans from Romania. And there were a number of us in the Northern Virginia area, similarly situated, couples, kind of career couples, a little bit older couples adopting these kids from overseas. And the little boy came into our home in April of 1991. And 6 months later, I gave birth to a baby girl. So we had in our home 2 kids within 6 months' time. We had 2 kids. They were 3 years apart in chronological age, but psychologically, psychosocially, they were about the same age, And so we were confronted. I mean, I call it a controlled experiment, if you're a nerdy econ person. And my husband's an engineer, so even more.
Oh,
nerdy,
gosh.
We're kind of like totally not prepared for what we're dealing with here, right? But it just became so clear, Nick. Kids need their parents. Kids need their parents, because what our boy was going through, what we had to do to help him develop 2.5 years of basically, profound neglect, isolation, very healthy physically, but profoundly neglected. And all the other parents in our adoption support group, whatever, they were all dealing with the exact same problems, the same kind of developmental problems, social problems, inability to look you in the eye, resisting being hugged, having sensory integration issues, and not being able to talk. That's the most obvious one, And so, we were plunged into this whole thing. And for quite a few years, we were kind of like paddling like mad to do what needed to be done. And he's fine now, but we were really scared of where this could end up. And we saw people, go down in flames, so to speak, because it's a much bigger deal than we realized, right? When we undertook it. And so that whole combination of experiences really convinced me kids need their parents, and therefore grown-ups need to behave. The whole libertarian idea applied to the family simply doesn't work. As long as the grown-ups agree to it, everything's going to be fine. That is not true. Okay, because the babies have put their own constraints on things, and we as adults have a responsibility to deal with that. To constrain ourselves either personally or as a society. With appropriate social structures and laws and expectations on people and stuff like that. Hopefully, you have it both at the personal level and at the social level. But of course, now we have neither. Pretty much we have neither. And so really for the last 20 years, I would say, Nick, I've been engaged in trying to spell all that out using my gifting from economics as opposed to child development. I mean, I know something about those fields, but that's not, I'm reading other people's stuff.
Well, I think that's fascinating because I'm as far as my economics, like if you were to ask me who I read in economics that really influenced me, it's going to start off with Milton Friedman, and then it's Karl Menger and Ludwig von Mises and Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams and Friedrich Hayek,
right.
Like these, and that introduction into people explaining economics so well was heavily influential on my larger political philosophy. And so I always say that I definitely have something of a libertarian bent when it comes to viewing political philosophy. but it's interesting. Like, my wife and I joke that when it comes to government, we want small government, very, very constrained, very limited, open free markets. And when it comes to our house, we have a benevolent dictatorship.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right.
But so you like you said, you entered into this environment where, again, I think people need to understand this, especially some younger people in our audience, that I think the mindset behind adoption is, okay, you find, maybe someone is having infertility issues and they'd like to adopt a child, and there's certainly people within foster care, or they might find a young mother who's looking to give up her daughter for adoption or whatever it might be. When you're talking about adoption, immediately following the fall of the Soviet Union, again, you're talking about state-run orphanages in Eastern Europe, among other places, where, like you said, it's not as if they were getting all this like nurturing and interaction or whatnot. This was really, really, really dire circumstances for these children at the earliest ages. And there's some people that might think, well, what does a baby really do when they're little anyways, right? They just eat and they sleep and they, poop and the whole deal, and how much interaction they need. Well, you got to experience this firsthand and what happens when a child does not get that interaction. And so as you have a specialty in economics, and as you're experiencing this on a very, very personal level, where you are very personally invested in this is not just a research project. How did all of that, when you say that, kids need their parents, I think most people listen, they go like, well, of course. Yeah, we know that, of course we know they need their parents, but what do you mean? Because you don't just mean, well, of course they need a mom and a dad to exist and to take, and to provide or whatnot. In a world where more and more families find themselves in a situation where they feel like both people have to work outside the home, and we need more daycare, and we need more resources in order to make sure that the mom can work or the dad can work or whatever else it is. What do you mean specifically when you say that the kids, like no kidding, need their parents at these earliest ages?
How long do we have, Nick? How long do we have, Nick? So I want to go back to something you very first said. Kids, what do kids need? They don't really need that much. They don't do much. They just kind of sit
when they're babies, right? What are they doing?
Yeah, they're just babies. What the heck? Okay, so there was a time when people, this is what you're saying is kind of scientism, I would say. Okay, because you're saying, we're looking at this as a kind of a mechanical thing, and they're not doing much, so therefore they don't need much. And there was a period of time where that was kind of the prevailing theory of child rearing, that they're like potted plants. You kind of water them a little bit once in a while. And, they're really good. They're really going to be fine, And there were a series of experiments and things that were done in the 60s, a series of things that were noticed. There was one guy who, during World War II, I think, noticed it. It was called, the guy's name will come to me in a minute. I want to say Rene Spitzer. He noticed something that he called hospitalism, because he was seeing children in hospitals who were separated from their parents because they were sick or had an injury or something like that. And at that time in the 40s, the concern was, we got to keep people safe from germs. We don't want people getting infected with germs. Sanitation. So the kids were pretty isolated. And if the kids coming out of that experience, being in the hospital for 2 weeks, they were different children when they got home. They were not the same child psychologically. And so this guy, whose name escapes me, he filmed it. Because he realized something was up. And so he started filming these kids. And he saw them day after day just kind of getting more and more listless, and kind of...
What age range are we talking
less
about?
And less. What's that?
What age range are we talking about?
I want to say most of them, we're talking about preschoolers.
Okay.
I think is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so that something was happening to them developmentally. And so what we've learned since about that is that the physical contact with your mother is extremely important to the development of the child, because the child and this I wrote about in my first book, Love and Economics, okay, which you just mentioned. It takes a family to raise a village. The original subtitle of this book, I'm just parenthetically, originally when I brought this book out, I was trying to explain to the economists and my libertarian buddies why we needed to care about the family. Yeah. And I'm going to go into that in a minute. And so the original subtitle was Why the Laissez-Faire Family Doesn't Work,
Ooh.
which really irritated my econ colleagues. And
Yeah, I
of course,
bet.
the typical radio host couldn't even pronounce the title,
Yeah.
laissez-faire,
Where's the
like
lazy fair? Yeah.
yeah, right. So it was a complete failure from that point of view. but the basic idea of the book was this, that when a child is helpless, this is a human person. This is not a plant, not a machine. It's a human person that needs to develop. And for human development, what you need is contact with another human, namely your mommy. I mean, that's the way it's built, and you're the mother baby is a unit for a while, and then gradually the child separates and individuates and stuff like that. But what we learned in our very scary way is that if a child does not have somebody responding to their needs, picking them up, holding them, rocking them, what happens to that child psychologically? Well, first of all, the rocking thing. Have you ever seen institutional kids doing this thing,
Yeah.
rocking them? They're rocking themselves. They're trying to stimulate their nervous system in a way that you and I would normally do by going, well, mommy goes like this, rocking the baby. Daddy goes like this. You bounce the baby on your knee and you toss them in the air and all that kind of stuff. You are stimulating their nervous system, getting them ready to speak, getting them ready for language. This is an amazing thing. The speech therapist taught us this. If you're trying to teach kids to speak, the first thing you do before you start your lesson, you put them in a little swing and you spin them. And after they've spun for a few minutes, their nervous system is more receptive, more ready to learn. How
Wow.
amazing is that, And that we have these instincts to do for the child what the child actually needs, even without knowing. This is Hayek, plain and simple. This is Hayek's um, uh, tacit knowledge,
Yeah.
right? That we can't express everything that we know, but that we have it kind of built into us. Well, this thing that was built into us by God Himself, right? That in order for a child to develop, what they need really is love, and attachment. That's what we need. And so the thing that was really scary, creepy to us, is that the high risk for an institutionalized child, or a child who has no attachments, is to have what they call attachment disorder. And you see it in foster care, you see it in orphanage kids, and the what you'll see is a child with no conscience, child who can't make eye contact, child who will do anything they can get away with. You have to punish them and constrain them because they're not constraining themselves. They don't learn how to do that. These are your crazy people. These are your school shooters.
So is this
Right?
is this
Yeah.
not to try to get I guess off on a tangent or anything like that, but is this are they seeing a
Yeah.
definitive connection between this sort of detachment disorder at very young ages? Like, so we're talking about infants, toddlers, etc., and then very developed antisocial behavior
Oh
later
yeah.
on.
Oh
So
gosh, yes. Oh gosh, yes.
so
Yeah.
like
People know.
like
People.
direct line connection between
People. Let's put it this way: it's not true that every orphanage child or every child in foster
sure.
care is going to have attachment disorder. But so bracket that. But it is true that a weakened sense of attachment, and there are different types of attachment, different styles of attachment, and that's very well studied, Nick. It's very well studied. The specialists know perfectly well, that about the importance of the mother child bond. And they always water it down to say that a caregiver, a consistent, committed caregiver, blah blah
And
blah.
that was going to be my
But
next
but in
question.
point of yeah, but in point of fact, most of the time, the only person who's going to be the committed
Yeah.
permanent caregiver is mommy. Um, and so the one of the hazards attached to that is you don't develop a conscience. You're not able to be social. You're not interested in being social. There's a neuropsychological um, component to it as well, which is development of the brain, Nick. I'm sure you've heard a million times children's brains don't fully develop until they're 25 or whatever. Okay. One of the most basic parts of brain development is in the part of the brain that's called the limbic brain, which determines your ability to be social with people, your ability to look at a face and recognize whether that person's mad or happy or whatever. Your ability to attach to other people, be in social interactions, kind of get the vibe of a room, and why is a ball game more exciting when you're in the stadium than when you're watching it on TV?
Yeah.
All of that kind of stuff. It's partly in the body. And you develop the limbic brain doesn't develop properly without mommy rocking you and looking you in the eye. It literally facilitates the development of the brain. Very fascinating. And to me, proof of the existence of a loving God, because he's built this into our bodies, that this is the way new humans come into being, is through an act of love between mom and dad, right? And then the continued interaction of love is what allows the ability to be social to develop.
So sorry, go ahead.
No,
Oh.
I've said a lot. I'm sure you have questions.
Well, so again, one of the things I find it really interesting, because I like economics and because I like laissez-faire economics, the subtitle that you had mentioned before, I found very interesting. But when I saw the whole "it takes a family to raise a village," I'm also not old enough to remember the Hillary Clinton famous book, "It Takes a Village." It was just incredibly popular. And it was this whole idea, what it was this whole idea of kind of a collectivist approach to raising children. And the reason why it was so popular, I think, to so many is because there, like so many things, there's an element of truth to the idea that obviously that when a child grows up, there's formative things that happen within their lives, and not all of those formative things are directly influenced by the parents, by grandparents, by friends, by family, by society in general, by various interactions that they have through school or whatever else it might be. And so from the standpoint of, well, yeah, you want like a neighborhood, like this is probably what a lot of like maybe 80s and 90s kids grew up with, is that if you were in a good neighborhood, all the parents kind of watched out for each other's kids and things like that. And so if that was your image of "it takes a village," you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But that was not what was being pushed. And so when you say love and economics, it takes a family to raise a village, can you kind of, juxtapose or compare or contrast what you're talking about? Because one of my biggest problems with the "it takes a village to raise a child" concept was this idea of treating, again, a caregiver and a mother as if they were interchangeable. Well, no, as long as you have somebody that's doing X, Y, and Z, it's perfectly fine. It's the same thing. It could even be better. Maybe this person has maybe they have a master's degree and whatever. And it sounds, and it's we have been experimenting with this and it doesn't seem to be working, but you wrote your book in 2001. So arguably this experiment was underway, but nowhere near as far as it is, now 23 years later. What were you seeing right up front that were the problems with that concept?
Yeah, so I mean, you hinted at it, and I want to underline it, emphasize it. It's the idea that there is an element of truth that you need a social structure that's conducive, so on and so forth. But what Mrs. Clinton really meant was that the state should raise the child. That state programs were to be a substitute for mothers and fathers. And there are a number of reasons why she thinks like that, but that need not detain us. The reality is, one pair of hands is not as good as another pair of hands. Okay. I mean, the idea that you can substitute your parent for daycare, where there may be turnover in that, right. You may not have the same daycare worker every day, and they'll quit. Yeah. They won't show up when you need them to show up, that kind of thing. Or that your dad and mom can get divorced and each marry new spouses, and that'll be perfectly okay. When your dad goes and has a kid has another child with his new wife, that you're going to be just fine. You're going to fit into that family just fine, even though you're going from house to house every weekend and those kids aren't.
Yeah.
I
experienced that.
Yeah. A lot of people have. And you were there in the room when I was talking about that at Live Action, when I was talking about the hardship of divorce. And, I can look out there and I can see them, they know, they've been through it. But the point is that relieving adults of particular responsibility for their particular child, that's what the sexual revolution in a way has been all about. It's been about saying you can do what you want sexually. Everybody will be fine. Everything will be fine. The idea that you should stay together for the sake of the kids, that's an old taboo. The idea that you should be faithful to your spouse, that's an old taboo. We'll be fine. We're way past that. We're so smart now, that kind of stuff. Um, yeah. But back to what I was seeing and what I was thinking and what I was fearing. Um, you know, in 2001, when I wrote this book, I was worried about uh, divorce, single parenthood, and too much daycare. Those were the big things, that I was worried about in love and economics. And all of those things were still kind of in flux, where people were arguing for them and saying that it was going to be okay. And so gay marriage was not on my horizon. Third party reproduction, anonymous sperm and egg donation, that wasn't on my horizon. I wasn't thinking about that at all. I was just thinking about kids need their own mom and their own dad to attach to. And what I want to say, what I want to, just finish the thought about attachment disorder is that a child without a conscience is extremely dangerous. A human being without a conscience is a very dangerous thing. And one of the points that I was trying to make in this book, because I was still trying to talk to economists, I was trying to say to them, look, to have a free market, we're counting on people behaving themselves. We're counting on people keeping their promises, making contracts that they're going to follow through on, that they're not going to go into the store and just take anything that they can get away with taking. We're counting on adults acting like that. Well, where do these adults come from, pray tell? Has anybody thought about where these adults come from? That we're not born that way. If I could use that phrase, we're not born that way. We have to be educated to that. And people have an image of, well, you sit the kids down, you explain the 10 Commandments. And what I learned when I was learning about attachment disorder, I came to see that the real action happens before the child can even talk. That the action of attaching a mother and a child to each other allows the child to care what you think. And this is the whole thing. The reason you don't go steal stuff is because. And the reason I don't go steal stuff, is because at some levels, like, what would your mother think if you did a thing like that?
Yeah.
And so you got this little, voice going in your head. Well, it starts out, it doesn't start like that. What if you have no mother? Okay.
Yeah.
What if you sit there in your wet diaper and you're crying and nobody comes? Okay. I will tell you what happens. No one comes. The child withdraws. Sooner or later, they stop crying. In their pre-verbal crazy little mind, they get the idea that they don't matter, that what they do doesn't matter, that nobody cares about them, that they don't really belong, and that they're going to do whatever they have to do to survive. That's what happened. That's the attachment disorder child. And so my point to the economists was that society cannot handle very many people like that and still be free.
Yeah.
Because if you got to be looking over your shoulder at every single person, you got to have a cop on every corner.
Yeah.
You got to have restrictions.
And even then it won't work because the cops will be the ones with the detachment disorders and they'll just have authority to.
Right. Where are you going to get the cops?
We were having this argument go ahead. Yeah, we were having this argument a while back where we were talking about how if you like individual liberty and property rights and free market economics, that all rests upon a moral substructure that has to be there. It doesn't just automatically exist in the way that some people would like to think it does. It requires people that actually respect certain moral codes to be able to rely on those systems to work effectively. Otherwise, you're constantly looking over your shoulder and you can never specialize, right? You can never really engage in division of labor. You can never do any of those other things. Well, let me ask you this, because I think I find it interesting how you kind of tied in the sexual revolution component of this, is that this didn't just happen overnight where all of a sudden it was like, oh, do moms and dads really matter? Can we just replace them with daycare? There was things that had to happen before you could start to try to make that argument. And when you talk about the sexual revolution, and I brought this up once in a debate and had some people get very mad at me, but I was essentially saying that, look, if you want to look at the breakdown that we're starting to see within the family, if you want to look at, I said, you have to take it back to the sexual revolution. And of course I got the typical, oh, you're very archaic and look at you, you're the, old toxic masculine patriarchy, women, but like, no, what I'm saying is is that if you don't, there are certain consequences to sex. One of those consequences,
What?
and again, consequences can be good
What?
or bad, right? But one can be a child, right? And one can be emotional damage. One could be, any series of things. I said, and if there isn't a moral structure that sees sex as something that needs to be respected as more than just a response to stimuli, well, then of course you're going to end up in a situation where people undervalue it, essentially, abuse it, misuse it, and then you show up in a society where now it's about personal gratification without the responsibility that goes with it. So, what did you see when you're thinking about like the concept between Love and Economics and then your other book in 2015, the sexual revolution and its victims? How do you think the sexual revolution has, like, what do you think are some of the most drastic effects of that movement and the family and maybe its impact, not just on children, but also men and women?
It takes a while to unravel it all, to think it all through. Right. And so when I wrote Love and Economics, I was really thinking about the bond between mother and father.
Yeah.
Because for the mother to attach to the baby, somebody needs to be taking care of the mother. Right. Because if you that's just a fact, and I remember sort of figuring this out and thinking this through. Well, okay, somebody else could take care of the baby while you're at work. Okay, well, now that bond isn't as great between you and the child, and between the caregiver. Because I was trying to do this, okay? So don't get me wrong. I tried to put my kid in daycare.
Yeah.
It's a family joke. Now, kid, you flunked out of daycare. He's a grown man now,
Yeah.
But, but it's like a family joke because, it was really not appropriate to put a child who'd been that badly neglected. He didn't need institutional care, for crying out loud. He needed mommy, right?
Yeah.
And it needed to be me or it wasn't going to work. But it occurred to me, Nick, at some point that the mother is dependent, the single mother who thinks she's doing it all on her own, she's really not. She's got her daycare provider. She's very dependent on her daycare provider, right? She's dependent on her employer for her to have money so that she can take care of herself, or the government, to provide her with money. She's very dependent on these other people who don't care about her.
Yeah.
Right? She's simply, their relationship is
Yeah.
completely commercial and instrumental, whereas the relationship between the husband and the wife, mother and father, should be that he is invested in her and her child. And, a good dad, as you obviously know, not only is that what a good dad needs to be for the sake of others, but this is what helps a man develop his full potential as a man, is the ability to see that he's needed. And, you may be an impoverished guy who's weak or, and who has physical problems or something, but they need you. These particular people need you in particular to come through for them. And that helps the man be who he's really called to be,
That could not be more true. That could not be more. I've said
that's foundation.
It was part of my speech at Live Action. I said, ladies, it is not your job to make good men, but you'll be shocked at the impact you can have at that process.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And so the idea, I once wrote a column about this, and it was called "There's No Such Thing as a Single Mother," because she looks like she's single. And so I don't use that term generally. I use the term unmarried. I don't use because every child has a mother and a father. Every child has that. Unmarried parents is what we're really talking about. But I wrote this column called "There's No Such Thing as a Single Mother," and years later, somebody showed me that she had cut that column out of the newspaper because it's a National Catholic Register. She had cut it out and laminated it and shown it to unmarried mothers.
Yeah.
Look, this is where you're headed. To try to encourage them about the fact that creating a good relationship with your sex partner is actually really important for everybody.
I just want to. I want to emphasize that for a moment because you said something in there that I think, again, you talk about Hayek and tacit knowledge. It was something that I think I kind of vaguely understood, but never heard it so succinctly or concisely articulated. And that was the idea that the moment you take the father, again, if the mother is going to provide the full care and attention that the child needs, especially at those early years that are so incredibly formative, where so much is happening that is unspoken between child and mother, child and parents, well, then someone has to provide for. And the theory behind it takes a village, and the theory behind kind of the collectivist approach to all of this is like, yeah, and that person can be the state. And then, like you said, it's the daycare worker, it's the government program, it's the social worker, it's whatever else. But like you said, in every other one of those relationships, if you even want to call it that, it's very transactional. The daycare worker is not going to show up regardless, no matter what, to do it, because she may like the mother, she may care about the mother, she may, on some esoteric level, take pride in her job of being helpful, but ultimately she's there to collect a paycheck, and she's got a bunch of other people, or he's got a bunch of other kids to take care of or to look after or whatnot. Same thing with the government program. The government program doesn't care. The government program, you are a number on an Excel spreadsheet, and money goes from one column into another column based off of certain criteria that are achieved or not achieved. That's it. And even if it's the social worker that, once again, is fully committed to trying to be a positive force in somebody's life, okay, fine, go talk to a social worker that's been doing it for more than a couple of years. And you're going to find a great deal of burnout. You're going to find a great deal of frustration with the system, because all of it is either bureaucracy or it's transactional, but it's not rooted. It can't be fundamentally rooted in like self-sacrificial love for the other person. Right. And there is a huge difference. You could argue that there's a transaction taking place in both scenarios, but everyone fundamentally understands the difference between a transaction that is purely commercial or bureaucratic or legal versus one that is rooted in genuine affection, love, compassion, empathy, sympathy. And I've never heard anyone, as you are articulating that, it's like, oh my gosh, this is what happens when you start to look at the family structure or raising a child as nothing more than a bureaucratic engineering problem to figure out, as opposed to a social dynamic that is so critical. And the very people that are a lot of times lecturing the rest of us on compassion and tolerance and love and acceptance, they're the same people advocating the system that is in many respects devoid of those very attributes when raising a child by separating it from the parents.
And actively undermining it. Okay?
Yes.
So, I mean, it's all well and good to point out that there are value for value exchanges between a husband and a wife. That's true. But that's not the whole story.
Yeah.
And it's certainly not the motivation. If it is the motivation, it won't last. Mm-hmm. It will not last. And the truth is that children need their parents not only in their tender years before they can talk, but throughout their whole life. I mean, I've talked to people whose parents got divorced when they were, maybe 30 years old or even older, talking to a guy who, his dad decided to go get a new wife or something. And all of a sudden, he lost his dad. His kids lost their grandparent because grandpa's now more interested in his new wife and her family than in his old family, And so the reality is that, when Jesus said to us in Matthew 19 and Mark 10, one to a customer for life, that's a slight paraphrase of what he said, but that cuts to the chase of what he said, right? The apostles were freaked out, like, this is so, oh my gosh, that is so hard. You can't be serious, But no, that he knew, he knew what this was going to cost us, what it was already costing people, I mean, he saw what polygamy did to some of the families of the Israelites, right?
Yeah. Oh,
you can't think of a single example that worked out.
I was listening to a pretty prominent, what we might call the manosphere or the red pill or whatever. Oh. And I always say, look, I actually have a little bit, I don't agree with a lot of what is said over there, but I actually have a great deal more sympathy for why it's being said and the manner in which it's being said. I think when you tell an entire generation of men, when you attempt to emasculate an entire generation of men because you think it will make society safer, you get two types of men out of that. You get one type of man that says, I refuse to be emasculated because my job is to protect society and I must be prepared and capable to do so. you have other men that essentially say, if you were giving me a binary choice between being a sheep or a wolf, I'm going to be a wolf. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole point of that was to say that I was listening to this guy talking about how, well, if you look back in society, of course, most of society, most of human history was based off of societies that were generally more polygamous in nature, or at least didn't have a negative mindset toward it. And the more successful you were as a man, the bigger your harem. And it was amazing because I wanted to look at that. I was like, man, is that one side of the historical story? Because if you look at the other side of that historical story, dynasties were lost and kingdoms fell because a guy had a harem. And now the brothers are killing each other for the throne, and they're massacring one another, and mass murder is taking place within families as a result of that loss of structure and that loss of a man standing up and being a legitimate leader within the household. But part of that leadership was that loyalty to his wife. So let me ask you this: as we look at the
before you do that, I gotta say something about polygamy, something more about polygamy, right? Because if people, as soon as people say that to you, Nick, what you got to say back is, yeah, and Jesus saved us from all that crap.
Yeah.
Really, because what happens in a polygamous society is that the rich men hog all the women.
It's true.
And when the rich men hog all the women, that creates problems.
Oh, it's very destabilizing.
It's very destabilizing. And the Christian system is a system of radical equality, because for every man, there's only one wife. And for every woman, only one husband. The kids always think that's great when I say that in my talks also. One and only one, and every child has a mother and a father. Every child has a mother and a father. That's the Christian legacy. And that's radical equality compared to what we have now. I mean, when you think about the things that have been done in the name of equality between men and women, the equality between gays and straights, what we end up doing is introducing even more radical forms of inequality into society by trying to, make equal things that, that really can't be made equal. Well, but anyway, enough about that. I want to hear what you had to say. You were going somewhere.
I think that's absolutely spot on. There's one other thing I really wanted to get to, and that's, and this kind of comes from your position as an economist as well, because I think that's one of the things that's interesting about this and the approach that you're taking at looking at this issue. So if we can acknowledge, let's say that not just maybe common sense or yours and my, faith or theological convictions, but like, no kidding, the data, right? The empirical data,
right,
suggests, overwhelmingly suggests that children need a mother and a father. That is the ideal. The ideal is a mother and a father. That is what they require to be able to fully develop. Of course, you're going to be able to find cases of kids that do okay without having that. You can find other cases where the kids have that and they still do poorly. But there's no question that when we look at all of the evidence and all of the dynamics, that mother and father is important. That connection between mother and infant and mother and toddler, and parents and toddler is not interchangeable. You can't just throw a different person into the mix and expect to get the same results. It doesn't make sense for either practical reasons, and you could argue it doesn't make sense probably for moral reasons. So what do you say to the parents now that are looking at this, or maybe the young couple that is looking to try to find someone that shares this beliefs, and they look around at the economy, they look around society right now, and they say, you know what? Society has not rewarded anything that you're talking about right now. They tell women to go off and run around, rack up a body count. It doesn't matter. Career. They tell men you're supposed to be docile. You're supposed to be weak. You're supposed to just, be totally in touch with your feminine side. And when it comes to kids, abort the ones you don't want. And then maybe later on in life, when you're ready and you've accomplished all the really important things, then, you can have a children. And they're looking at all this going, it's become harder to find somebody that actually shares the values you've just articulated. And then if I do, economically, how are we supposed, if we're not already rich, right? How are we supposed to make that work in the modern economy where more and more it feels like it requires two incomes just to pay the food and the mortgage?
Yeah. So you're asking multiple questions, really.
Yeah.
I mean, the first big question that I don't have an answer to, because I hear it all the time from young people. Where are all the good guys? Where are all the good girls? How do I find somebody? And I hear this even from people who are religious and who are embedded within religious communities. I was talking to uh, Yoram Hazani, who's an Orthodox Jew, who's a leader in a certain branch of the conservative movement, and he lives in Israel, where everybody in his community has 9 kids or 8 kids or whatever, and even they are afraid to get married, because of the psychological propaganda and messaging and stuff like that.
Wow.
So there's the messaging. There's the fact that we've all had all this propaganda inflicted on us, and so everybody's a little bit destabilized. Everybody's thinking's a little bit rocky, and I think we all kind of feel that. It's like, this seems true, but I'm getting all this noise. The signal's really noisy. I can't sort out what's really true. So there's that part of it, but then there's just the reality. How do you find the person that you're looking for? And I don't have a good answer to that question. Now, once you do find somebody and you want to try to build a life together that that allows plenty of time for parents, plenty of time for the family part of the family, it's extremely important that you do 2 things. Number one, you must not rack up a bunch of student debt.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I tell you, I encountered this quite a lot. I used to lecture for the Alliance Defending Freedom. I suppose you've heard of the ADF.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
They have a program for law students, and I used to lecture in that program every summer for first-year law students. And whenever I would say that, you must avoid student debt, their hearts would sink. You could just see their faces collapse, because they're all going into an enormous amount of debt to get their law degrees. So that's one thing that I would really recommend, that you go to a state school or whatever. But that's a force to be reckoned with. That's a damper on fertility that as a society we haven't come to grips with. And the other thing is, you cannot have a mortgage that requires 2 incomes to pay.
Yeah.
You cannot do that. And I don't care where, if you have to move someplace smaller or something like that, that's something you really have to be very intentional about, because you may think that your kids will be fine in daycare, or you can manage, but things happen. You can't plan all of that in advance.
Yeah.
And so if you absolutely have to have both incomes in order to meet your mortgage, you won't make the decisions that you really need to make with your kids first and foremost in your mind. So one of the pressures that happened to us of our generation, I'm a young professional in the 1980s, right? And we all think, oh, women's career and man's career and balance and all that. Well, you end up living in a big city, because that's where you can find a job for 2 professionals,
Yeah.
right? That's harder to do in rural Virginia or something. And so that puts a lot of pressure on the housing market in those big cities. And, there's just a lot of secondary effects from that. But if you can, work out a way to live someplace where the mortgage isn't as high, so that, if your husband loses your job or somebody gets sick and somebody needs extra care, you just don't want to be in that jam where you absolutely have to have both incomes.
No,
and that's just at the personal level. At the public policy level, there are a whole bunch of things that probably need to change. Well, that obviously need to change.
I still find it fascinating that it was a Democrat, Patrick Moynihan, that was warning so much about the greater societal problems that we were going to face by the breakdown of the family within certain communities.
Yes.
And he was excoriated for it. And he was doing it at a time where the problem was about 1/3 of what it is right now. And it's amazing. It's amazing what we're seeing. I got to tell you this, and kind of to wrap up the conversation, because I really appreciate the time that you've given us. I'd love to talk some more about other issues maybe in the future, because I'd love to pick your brains on some really in depth on some of the economic side as well. But one of the things that I was really encouraged of is when we were speaking at Live Action. I mean, here we are in Southern California on a Saturday, and that room was jam-packed with students, I would say, ranging anywhere from about probably 16 to 26.
Yeah, I think that's about right.
Yeah, 16 to 26. And it was both encouraging and a little bit funny at times, because You saw it where we'd have our question and answer period, and a young man would get up there and he goes, my name's Jason. I'm going to school here. I'm 24. I'm also single. Right? Like it was,
they're signaling.
Yeah. I'm single, ladies. And then I remember I'd have
that was great. I love that energy.
and I was, and I gave my talk, and so I had a lot of young men come up to me afterwards, like, how do I prepare? How do I do this? And I'm like, well, buddy, I'm going to tell you right now, you're currently at a conference where you're probably outnumbered 2-1. This is what we call a target-rich environment, right? Like maybe you should stop talking to me. I'm taken and not interested. Right? But I do think this is the last thing I'd like to really get your take on. As I'm looking out, I see a lot of people that have been lied to. I see a lot of people that have been hurt by it. Again, your book, The Sexual Revolution and Its Victims, I think is really important. I think sometimes I need to have a little bit more sympathy for people that were bought into something, lived according to that, and thought they were doing the right thing. They were doing what the experts told them, and now they feel lied to and betrayed. But I do think that more and more people are waking up to that at younger ages, and I am, believe it or not, actually encouraged that the other side of this debate, the one that are pushing this narrative, I almost feel like they're starting to get frantic. They're starting to get a little bit unhinged in how they do this. And I feel like a younger generation that maybe has not received all of the propaganda is starting to look at that going, yeah, it looks a little desperate. And they're looking around for, okay, I get it. You got a bunch of experts saying X, Y, and Z, but as I look around in my own life or my own community or my own sphere of where I live, I'm seeing that the people that are happy are not doing it the way the experts tell me to. Do you see the same thing at all, or do you think we've got a lot longer to go?
Well, economists and forecasts, not a good thing to be asking an economist about a forecast. but seriously, I think, in every generation you have different elements, right? Because people bitch and moan about the baby boomers. Well, I'm a baby boomer. Thank you very much. I've spent my entire life trying to fight this stuff. Please don't blame me. That's like really rude.
Yeah.
But I get what you're saying at the same time. I get what you're saying. And so the young people that we encountered there at the live action meeting, they're a breed apart within their own age group. Yeah. They're a special group. And they know it. And, some of them would be talking to you about the pressures they face at school, or some of their moms were talking to me about, that my kid's at public school, but because I can't get them out of there because of this and that. But I'm in there fighting for them at the school board. I'm trying to get some of these crazy things to stop. But I do think the irrationality has reached a fever pitch, and there are a number of forces pushing back. So I was very encouraged by the recent CAS report out of the UK, basically saying that trans medicine is unscientific, completely unscientific. We're stopping it here in the United Kingdom. We're not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
And the response to that from the trans establishment over here has been basically hysteria. Not really anything very reasoned. So I think some people are going to see that and react to it, and that's all good. But I think this is our opportunity, Nick, to, yes, go ahead and fight on each issue by issue, but at the same time, keep calling attention to the underlying issue of mother, father, child. The human person is meant for love. That means personal, not bureaucratic, not interchangeable parts, not commercial. It means personal human encounter. That our Christian worldview is in fact the more humane. By a long shot, it's the more humane. And the sexual revolution, the thing I prove in this book, the sexual state, this is really about showing that the state has enforced the sexual revolution from the very beginning. It's never been a popular uprising.
Yeah.
Even though it kind of looks like that now because so many people are invested in it and try to defend it. But if you look at the trans thing, you can easily tell that it's top down.
Yeah.
There's nobody.
That's a great point.
They're forcing it into the schools. They're forcing parents to comply. I mean, they're rewriting the definition of parenthood, basically. That a good parent is one who does what the state tells them.
Yeah.
Yet it's desperate, is what it is, and it's all top down. There's nothing grassroots about this thing. Even though they can fill a courtroom or fill a legislative chamber with their crazy people, whom they bring in by the busload. Mm-hmm. To testify and whatnot. I imagine you've seen that in your in your experience in Virginia. Just busloads, crazy people, and that's been going. But the point is that has been the pattern from the beginning. Okay, that's how it was in gay marriage. I was in the middle of the gay marriage debate for from 2008 through to the end, and that's how it was with that. That's how it is with the abortion stuff. Lies, misconceptions. Deliberate falsehoods, distortion of data, suppression of data, silencing of critics. I mean, I have an interview on my channel. I have a YouTube channel too, Nick, that people might want to come see me at. On our channel, I interviewed a guy who was involved in the debate over the link between abortion and breast cancer. And he's a scientist, he's a biology guy, been collecting studies on this subject for a long time. And he was there when the National Institutes for Health came to the consensus that there is no connection between abortion and breast cancer, because the only people we invite to our meeting are the people who already agree with us. Yeah. And I got this doctor to describe that, just tell us what happened, because I wanted that on the record. Nick, he lost 2 jobs over this issue in the 90s, in the 1990s. That's how long this crap's been going on.
Yeah. The gatekeeping has been going on a lot longer than people think. The reason why I think everybody's noticing it over the last 5 to 10 years is because it finally escaped the university. And now it's worked its way within our elementary schools, our middle schools, our high schools, our HR departments and companies, our politics and everything else. I think a lot of times people thought, this is some crazy stuff in the sociology department of Berkeley. Like, okay. But now those people are writing the textbooks for your high schoolers. And so it's a very different world. Right. But well, Dr. Morse, thank you so much. Again, to our audience, Dr. Morse, founder of the Ruth Institute, author of several books. We've discussed 2 of them today. But Dr. Morse, tell our audience where they can find you on social media and any other place.
Sure. So we have a website, ruthinstitute.org. The best way to get in touch with us is to sign up for our weekly newsletter. Then you'll hear from us every week. And we have never been censored in our email list. So that's always good. We have a YouTube channel where we have been censored from time to time, and where we get obnoxious little boxes that say context, Trevor Project, or, abortion is really this, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so you can just type in Ruth Institute on the YouTube search bar, you'll find us. But we also have a locals channel, which is a free speech alternative to YouTube. And so we really want people to sign up over there, and get involved there. We have a very big Facebook page, and you can find us on Twitter. So those are the places where you can find the Ruth Institute.
All right. Well, Dr. Morse, thank you very much for your time. And thank you very much to our audience for sticking by. Also, go ahead and go into the Circle. If you go to our show notes page, you can find our community chat under Circle. If you have somebody that you'd like us to invite on, or some questions you'd like to for us to ask to a guest, that's a great place to go on there and make those recommendations. Once again, thank you very much for joining us. I'm Nick Freitas of Making the Argument, and we will see you next episode.